Well, hello, everyone watching this informational interview. My name is Jordan Ely, and I'm one of the dramaturgs for the Teens Behind the Scenes program with the National Theater, and I'll be preparing the educational documents for the Jagged Little Pill production. And I'm so grateful to be joined today by Claire Warden. Claire, thanks so much for being here and taking the time to talk to me today.
Thanks, Jordan. I'm very happy to.
So, could you introduce yourself to our audience and tell us a little bit about what you do? And yeah.
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Claire Warden. I use she, her pronouns. And I currently work primarily as an intimacy director and an intimacy coordinator on Broadway shows, on network television and TV shows. I'm the intimacy director for the original production of Jagged Little Pill and the consequently tour production. And I'm also an actress and a fight director, so I also create scenes of violence for theatre. And I work training. I'm part of a company called IDC, and I'm the director of advanced training, which means I also work to help train intimacy directors and intimacy coordinators as they come up through the industry.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So how did you know that you wanted, or how did you come to find that you wanted to tell stories through the medium of theater or even film?
Well, for me, it was something that I discovered very early on. I think my first ever show, I was maybe 3 or 4 years old, and it was like a school. I'm from the UK, and we do a school play at Christmas time every year, the Nativity play. So that was, I think, my first ever performance, and I loved it. And I think by the age of 12 years old, I had made the decision that I was going to be an actress. I think at 7, I thought I wanted to be a stunt performer, but then I changed to actress. I think I just cared a little bit more about my body and not like breaking it too early. And so it was, for me, it was a very clear path. I've always really thrived on connections, deep human connections with people, and that kind of companionship of storytelling. And I've always been really interested in people and trying to understand experiences or thought patterns that were not necessarily mine. And I realized very quickly that I could play and know what it was like to be other people when acting, like when doing a character. So it was a very simple path for me, honestly, to just be like, I know this is what it is. And then everything, all my schooling, all my university, all my training was just always geared towards being an actor. And I've continued to do that my whole life.
Wow, that's awesome. I love that it was such a clear path for you. Yeah. And so, with the the changes that have happened in the theater and film industry, especially over recent years, there seems to be a lot more focus on intimacy direction, intimacy coordination. And so could you tell us a little bit, I mean, it's just such a new field, it's an emerging space that is becoming increasingly more important to the way we do work in the entertainment industry. Could you tell folks a little bit about what this means to be an intimacy director, intimacy coordinator, and what that looks like?
Yeah, I think so. It came out of, as our industry, both the theater industry and the TV and film industry has, grown and developed. There have been approaches and situations that had become harmful, toxic, or continue to take away the agency and the right and the empowerment for actors to be able to be in choice and consent about what happens to their body. And it wasn't that this had just started happening, or even that people had just started speaking up about it, but the kind of the dynamics, the power dynamics of an industry meant that there were the people that were in charge had a lot of power and a lot of influence, and the people that weren't in charge, which tended to be the actors, even though they're the ones we see, like they're the ones that represent it, were at a loss of how to make a change in such a big industry. And so back in 2015 and 16, this conversation about kind of care and consent of actors was happening, and that's where the birth of this approach to consent-based work really happened, which is intimacy direction and intimacy coordination. Basically, right at its fundamental level, it's about allowing actors, even though their bodies are used as part of their storytelling, right? That a painter has their canvas and their paint, right? A musician has their guitar or their piano. Actors our bodies are the instrument we use to tell our art. And so it's really about helping actors to understand as the human being that's here with the actor as well, what's okay for their body to show to people when we're talking about nudity, to where being touched by other people is okay, and what stories, especially within kind of stories around sex, sexuality, and kind of intimate touching, that they're okay to tell. And it's really allowing them to be in choice about that, and then have the change in the industry to have people support that. So it's really about creative storytelling within the boundaries of an actor. And what was happening before is there was a lot of storytelling without paying attention to the boundaries of the actor, without really paying attention to the story that we're telling. It tends to be like, there's a story of sex, and that's just sex happening, right? But that's as complex and interesting and nuanced a story as a story about violence, as a story about death, as a story about the relationship between a father and a child, you know? So that was where it came from, was that because we didn't quite know how to do it, what we needed was a discipline, an approach, a concrete way of being. If we pay attention to this, if we do this and we do this, we can help to build that consent in the room. So that's fundamentally what it is. For an intimacy director, when I work on a show, what I'm doing is helping the whole production to follow that. So I'm there as an advocate for the actors. So I'm talking with any of the actors one-on-one that might have any of that kind of work, love stories, kissing, pretending to do scenes of sex, any nudity, any exposing areas of their body that they wouldn't normally expose. So I'm talking with them and helping them figure out what's okay for them and what's not okay. But then I'm also talking with the rest of the production and anyone that might be involved in that scene to let them know what the boundaries of the actors are, and then how they can help to support them. And I'm working with the director very closely. So as we're creating these stories on stage, I call them kind of physical stories, right? Mm-hmm. That we're choreographing them in the way we would choreograph a punch, in the way we would like choreograph sometimes, some narrative dance, right? That we're crafting this story with the director, but I'm also talking to the wardrobe department to make sure that the costumes they're wearing cover the parts they need covered, or that we're covering, we're being clever in masking and covering what does need covering. We're talking to the stage manager to make sure that the rehearsals are set up in a way that supports them. Sometimes we're talking to prop people if we have particular props involved. We're talking to our whole crew to make sure they know when they can't be backstage. And the whole of the production, like right up to general management and what we're telling people about the show, and what provisions we put in for our audience. So it's about whole liaising with the team as well as individual with the actors and the directors, and choreographing and like creating these physical stories.
Yeah, that sounds such a collaborative process, and I love hearing that you are involved in so many different aspects of the production, from not just the actual sort of embodiment of the scene, but also down to what you're putting on your body and how it's, fits in within the rest of the story. So it's very dramaturgical. So my dramaturgy brain is like, yes, yes, yes. Yeah. And so you also kind of specified, and when you were introducing this idea of intimacy direction, that there seems to be a difference between intimacy direction and intimacy coordination. So could you talk a little bit about those differences and what that might entail? What is the difference between, working on a film or TV show versus working on theater in this realm?
Yeah, so the intimacy direction is the term we use when we're working on live performance, theater, opera, dance, anything where there's an audience and the performers are performing live. Intimacy coordination is what the title we use when we're working on-camera work, TV, film, anything that where we're recording it on camera and it gets edited together. And there are some fundamental differences in the way that we do our job because of the different ways those operate. The timing can be very different if you're working on a film or a TV show than theater, right? The theater, we tend to come in on day one, we all get together in rehearsals, we work our way through the show, we keep building it, then we go into tech, then we like get all the elements, then we go into previews maybe, and then we like open it to an audience. Mm-hmm. In a film or a TV show, we're shooting all out of order, right? We may be doing like a couple of episodes, say, for example, if we're doing a TV show, but we're shooting all different scenes on different days. Everything's there at once, right? So the camera, the costumes, the lights, everything is there right away the first time we shoot it. And it moves in a very different way, and we can stop and go back and do another take. We can decide exactly where the camera is and what it sees. Whereas in theater, depending on where you're sitting in the theater, you're going to see a slightly different angle of something. These actors have to do the same show night after night after night for months, sometimes even years. Whereas on film or camera, you might do a couple of takes, but once you've kind of done that scene, that's it. We're done. We move on to the next. So there's differences in the environment. And so as an ID or an IC, that's the kind of shortening we use, intimacy director, intimacy coordinator, we have to adapt to the way that the art is made, the way that this story is told. There's a lot of technical aspects we have to understand. We have to understand how cameras work. We have to understand how the sound gets recorded. We have to understand what lighting is and how much of a set we'll have, because we'll kind of pretend like we'll have half these sets, and then from the camera that it like might just be a big empty stage when it looks like we're in someone's apartment. So there's a technical difference in understanding of how those different mediums work, mm-hmm. and a different engagement and kind of through line, as it were, of creating the stories.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting about medium and understanding all of the elements and how those come together. And so, your experience, being an actor, right, and coming into this work, how do you make that transition into working, in as an ID or IC, and using your sort of experience and training as an actor to inform your work there?
I think it's been incredibly helpful for me because I have a really strong understanding of what it takes to act any kind of story. Mm-hmm. And there's a real, there's a craft of acting that we learn how to do in a skill set. And I really think you have to kind of understand how something works in order to come in and make shifts to improve it, right? You can't just walk into something and be like, I don't know how this works, but I'm going to make it better, right? We have to know how it works. And so I think I have a real understanding of like what an actor's process is and how they go from like getting their script to learning their lines to embodying that story with their scene, and what it feels like to pretend all these stories with a different person, and then have a director come in and give you notes and try and like help you find it. And then what it's like to do that, and the difference of what it's like to do that, pretending that it's just you and them with a camera right here and like 7 people all looking at you, opposed to pretending to do this right here when you have, 900 people in the dark sitting out there watching you do it, and you did it this afternoon at the matinee and you have to do it again tomorrow night. So that, I think, has helped me to work with the actors and what they're doing. It also means that I have a great understanding of storytelling, of creating repeatable stories that can feel really real in the moment, but actually are quite technical to create. It allows me to understand kind of the information, like a lot of what you do, and the help from our dramaturgs, right? To take information and turn that into a living, breathing story. And all of the elements of what other people are doing, other people's jobs, the lighting person, the set person, the camera person, right? All these people that are helping us to create this story. So it's been very helpful, and it means that I can kind of speak the language that people speak, and then add a consent process to that to enhance it, as opposed to work kind of against it, because that doesn't really get us anywhere. So for me, and both like individually, but also as one of the kind of leaders of the movement, of kind of consent in theatre, is to really understand how do we bring these concepts together so that people can do their best work and it's consensual.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah, I love that. And, since we're talking specifically about your work on, or our students will see Jagged Little Pill, they'll be able to experience our production. I know, very, very exciting. Can you talk a little bit about, the kind of work that you did on that show, perhaps what part of the process you came in on, and, since it deals with all of these heavy topics, mental health and sexuality and, so many different race, all of these different things, what was the intimacy direction process like for this production in particular?
Yeah, so with Jagged Little Pill, we have a couple of aspects that we were really focusing on. One is kind of that discovery of young people in their sexuality, in their sexual attraction, in their sexual identities, and how those relationships come together and then are in conflict. And then we have, we saw, as your folks will see, we have moments where some of our characters do come together, kissing and sexually. And so just like part of the very practical aspect of building that with the actors within their consent levels, and really clearly telling the stories of the differences of experience between these two people being together in their attraction and desire for each other, and then that person with another person and how that's different. So that kind of storytelling aspect. We also have, running through the whole play, a story of sexual assault, and both of sexual assault of a character that when we witness and we see the moment of their sexual assault, but also the remembering of a sexual assault of other characters. So not only are we kind of really being very supportive in creating that story for all of the actors that are involved in showing that physical story of a sexual assault, because that's quite a heavy story to tell, and night after night for all of the actors involved, for the person playing the survivor of the assault, and for the person playing the perpetrator. Like, that's a very difficult story to tell. So really both creating that physically, but also ensuring that we are helping them hold that story in a way that's healthy and sustainable for them, and doesn't start to sit really deeply in them as they do it again and again. And then we have a number where we're really kind of addressing the sexual assault epidemic in our society. And we have more kind of dance-based choreography that depicts lack of consent, crossing of boundaries, the objectification of people. So with our chorus, we're also creating, along with, I'm working alongside the choreographers to help create that in a way that gives the actors, enough inspiration and impulse to really tell that story, but again, that's not gonna be unsustainable or make it too difficult or painful to tell that story. And then for the whole production, like this whole production is a story of the how we deal with sexual assault, both people that are direct survivors of it or perpetrators of it, but also how in a community we help those survivors of sexual assault and how we try and stop it. And so for the whole company, that's a heavy story to hold. So we're also just making sure that we have ways to help them tell that story when they're doing the show, but also like let it go and go about their daily lives. Or if they themselves are survivors of sexual assault, which, we're looking at a situation where, 1 in 4 women in the US have been sexually assaulted. I think it's 1 in, maybe 6 or 7 men have been. And then, those that are on the non-binary transgender gender fluid spectrum are often more likely to be victims of assault, sexual assault. And so, how we're supporting the actors that like, I know this story and I have to kind of pretend to tell it here. So how we help them hold that as well. So those were the main aspects that I was part of, the kind of the support and the holding of a story, and then the specific choreography for those moments of intimate interaction, whether they're consensual or non-consensual. And then the kind of arc of the characters' journeys as they go through these moments of discovery and experience.
Wow, yeah, that's absolutely necessary and important, especially to be able to tell the story, but also in a safe way, as you're pointing out. And in terms of taking this production, right, being in one house, one place every night, but then taking it into this touring space where you're going from city to city and all of these different things, new elements and circumstances are often thrown into the production just by virtue of having to travel so much. How do you sustain this kind of work when you're doing the touring production? So how do you take the intimacy direction work into these touring spaces to ensure that same level of safety?
So a lot of it is about kind of introducing protocols and ways of creating and approaching the work, and tools that the actors can use, both in their kind of the ways they can communicate about the work and keep in conversation, feeding back to each other as they go, but also what we call closure tools, which are ways to kind of step into the work and now we're going to tell the story, and then step out of it and leave it behind each night. And the way we can like work as a team for them to be like, we're going to be brave together and tell this story, and we're going to take, as artists, take really good care of each other whilst we're telling a really difficult story. And the idea is to, I introduce those as we build this with a view of allowing them to become the tools and the approaches that the actors take ownership of themselves, right? So they start to like learn this new way of doing something, or of checking in with each other, or of talking, and it becomes part of the habit of their work. So that even as they travel, and even as other stressful things happen or changes happen that they're having to adjust to, whether it be in the production, whether it be in their lives in general, whether it be in the world, that these tools become these helpful ways that they've gotten a habit to. In the same way as like, once they know the show, like once the dancers know the show, they're going to know how they need to warm up before the show each night, right? They're like, in this track, I've got a lot of leaps and splits, and I've got a lot of like heavy leg work. So for this show, I need to do a little bit more leg warm up, but I also need to make sure that I'm really doing some loosening in my upper body so that it can flow with it, right? So they'll adjust that warm up to what they need for that show. And then the cool down after, like if they're stretching after, then they'll be like, and I need to kind of like spend a little bit more time stretching out my quads, because in that one number, I'm using them over and over and over again, and I don't want to get tight in them. It's a similar kind of thing that they're looking at. What do I need to get myself ready, and then in a healthy way, bring myself out of that so that I can maintain a level of health. And we're talking physical health, but we're also talking emotional health and psychological health, and readiness, and closing out of that, so that we can do this on a long-term basis, and so that we can. So when we're like, oh my God, we don't have an upstage left entrance in this theater. We're going to have to rework everything. And we're like, so let's focus on that, because everything else is just taking care of itself because it's a habit now. So that's the real goal, is that we make this a habit that becomes a natural way of working.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally, I think that's so important, that, establishing a mechanism or a strategy or protocol that you have to follow that, can ensure that kind of care that was put into the production when it was in one place. So that's incredible. And so you've talked about it throughout. And so I don't want to, feel like I'm making you repeat yourself or anything, but if you could kind of, why is it important to have this kind of work on production? I think that I see the value in what you all do so much. And I think it has really enhanced the level of care we take into this work. And so, could you talk just about like how prescient and essential it is to have intimacy work in the entertainment industry?
Yeah, there's a couple of aspects, I think. One of those is that we have to remember that this is a new conversation still. Like, we first really started bringing this work to the industry at the beginning of 2017, right? That's just 5 years ago. Like, if you think about how long people have been doing this, it's a new conversation, and it's a conversation that has not ever happened in a large scale in this industry. And so there's going to be a period of education and learning of how everybody in their different roles can understand what they're bringing into the room, and then how they can adjust that to support the consent of these actors and the healthy and sustainable working environment of everybody in the room. So I think and not everybody's managed to be able to get that education or that understanding yet, right? So part of it is just spreading the word, is just, I think about it when the shift from in film work, when we went from using film in cameras to digital, right? The whole industry suddenly had to learn a whole new way of filming. And some people were like, why do we have to change? The old way is the better way. This is what I know, right? And there were some people who were like, but there's so much more we can do with this. And eventually now, and I don't think there's anyone, yes, there's a certain look, but I don't think there's be anyone that would be like, the digitalization of what we film has made the industry bad and worse, right? So it's a level of just learning a whole new thing. Mm-hmm. I also think what's really important about it is that no matter what play you're doing or show you're doing, no matter what genre, no matter what time period it's from, at the crux of what we do in the entertainment business, right? Theater, film, TV, dance, opera, immersive theater, whatever it is we are telling the stories of human beings. And there are human beings telling the stories of human beings. And if we are fundamentally ignoring a very large aspect of the human beings that are telling the story, which is their right and ability to feel secure and safe in their body, then not only are we doing a disservice to the basic human rights in the workplace. There's no other workplace where you're not an accountant's office and you'd be like, right, you just take your clothes off and walk through the office and you don't have anything to say about it, right? So not only are we ignoring people's human rights, but what we're doing is when an actor is in a state of trying to protect parts of themselves, whether it be emotionally or physically, when we are putting the energy into, I don't feel safe, or I don't feel truly seen or heard, or I don't feel I'm being given the dignity as a full human being to do work in a way that is not harmful to me, then all of that is being taken up with protecting ourselves, and it's not available for our acting. And what's really cool is that when you just make a couple of shifts to work in a consent-based process, and actors can relax that part of it, there's so much more of them available to do the work, and their acting can just be so much more expansive, and they actually will go and tell braver stories and do deeper work and do more detailed work, because that part of both their physical instrument, but also their emotional journey is available for their art. So it actually makes better stories, right? Our theater, our TV, our film gets more truthful, it gets more nuanced. We get to tell stories that include the whole diversity of our world and our cultures, right? If you just have one person in control who's telling the story, who's like, everyone has to tell the story like this, often because of the way our industry is set up, that is a person. The people in control are still ones with large amounts of privilege. And so we're getting a very narrow lens. So we're also opening up the lens of experience to be able to tell the stories for the audience, which is wide and a diverse range of identities and experiences. So basically, people are learning to make the whole industry better.
Yeah. I love that. And you're right. It's amazing what you can do when you take that time, when you assume. Something that I'm learning from you is intimacy, coordination, direction is about, catering to the most vulnerable in the room and assuming that people are vulnerable, and just like using that as your base level and making things accessible and careful and moving from there, rather than trying to accommodate as we go, right? It's just like, at the base level, this is what people need, and here's how we're going to approach that. And I think that's lovely.
And what it's also doing is really acknowledging that each individual person is going to need a different level of things, of care or boundaries, and that can change regularly, right? And we make assumptions in our society about who needs what, or who is vulnerable and who isn't, right? There's a real myth, and it's not true, that like people, cis men don't need as much care, or don't really need to think about consent as much as women, right? Now, yes, historically, we have had a lot more attempt of lack of consent and boundary crossing on women, but every human being, regardless of their gender, needs to feel respected and that they have a choice over what happens to their body. So it's also like trying to get rid of those myths and just be like, this person right here, in order to do your best work, and it doesn't matter why, we don't ask why you have this boundary, but what do you want to have say over, so that you can relax as a human and engage as an artist.
I love that. Relax as a human and engage as an artist. I think that is a lovely sort of quotable. Yes. So lovely, all this great information, background, and behind the scenes about what you and others in your field do in this line of work. What advice might you give to young folks who are looking to, embark down this path, whether they find it now or they find it later? What sort of advice or offerings can you give them to think about for folks who are interested in continuing to learn more about this emerging, burgeoning field?
I would say that a couple of things. There's at any point, whatever your entry point is or whatever your role currently is, every artist can think about how they can support consent in the room from their role, right? And learn about what consent means, and learn about, if they're actors, great. What are my boundaries? What does consent look like for me? How do I support my scene partners in their boundaries and their consent? How do I ask for what I need? If you're interested in directing, great. How do I support that? If you're a dramaturg, what information is helpful in this period? What were the thoughts around sex and sexuality? And what were the thoughts around nudity in this place? And how can I gather information that will help the production to make something that's authentic? So I think you can think about consent at any point and look at building that. If you're really interested in actually, progressing into an idea, and I see who runs that, who guides that whole process, who facilitates the whole process. It's something, there are a number of different aspects that you have to be really versed in order to do this job. So there's the advocacy part, right? Which means that we really understand not only about consent, but we're also understanding about how power dynamics work. We're understanding about how to, we're doing like our anti-racist work, our gender inclusive work. We're really understanding how to see and support individuals, and then how to be of service and a steward for them. So there's a whole part of advocacy work. There's also a whole part of choreography work, because we are choreographing. So there's an understanding of how to tell physical stories. There's an understanding of how the body works, biomechanics, the language we use when we're creating choreography. A lot of that I got from my fight work, because it's very similar. I'm telling a story with bodies of something that looks like it's happening, but it's actually not happening, and this is how we pretend. And then you also have the kind of the understanding of creating a story within a theatrical or within a TV film on camera process. So an understanding of that medium. So if you're interested in theater, that's a good place to go. If you're interested in film and TV, then you need to understand how a set works, right? And how cameras are used and what happens. So it's a experience of being in those mediums that you wish to work in. You have to fully understand how a system works before you can infiltrate it and make changes. And I would say that an intimacy director, intimacy coordinator is not an entry-level job. It is not the kind of thing necessarily that I think you can go into like right out of school. What really helps is to get that experience of how productions work from whatever angle you like, and really understand how the people in this work, how the teams work, how storytelling works. And from then it's a good, once you have a solid foundation, then you can transition into, and how do I help shift this? And also, what's my advocacy skills, and how do I build those? And I think you can come from any angle. Like, you can learn the advocacy stuff if you're like based in the theater and you can train in the advocacy, or if you're based from an advocacy point of view, if you're and that's your path, then you can learn how the theater world works. So, there's many points of entry. It's a very involved job. It asks a lot of you as an intimacy director and a coordinator, because you're really holding space for everybody. So it's a job where a lot of self-knowledge and self-understanding is vital, so that you can really maintain and manage what's happening with the human, as you're trying to support all the other humans. Mm-hmm. So it can be very rewarding, but it asks a lot, and it takes a good amount of training in order to be able to really responsibly and ethically do the role. But there are companies out there that are offering training in like beginning consent. I work for a company called IDC, Intimacy Directors and Coordinators, and we have a lot of one-off workshops and courses that teach consent for all artists. There are other companies out there that offer kind of more ad hoc workshops and training sessions. So what really interests you, follow that path. I would say in all art, follow what your heart is interested in, and that'll kind of keep you going down something where you really can engage deeply.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I love that you say, you can start always advocating like from whichever corner of the world. You don't have to necessarily be a intimacy director proper, right? To advocate for your fellow actors, for yourself, for the process. And so I think that's such a lovely place to start. Thank you so much, Claire, for joining today and, telling us all about this incredible field. I'm looking forward to continuing to see this field grow and move into so many different parts of theater. And so thank you for your advocacy work there and also just for your theatrical work there. It's incredible.
You're welcome. It was lovely talking to you.
All right. Thank you. Oh, and also, if you wanted to continue to follow your work, is there a way that they can, continue to do so?
Yeah, absolutely. They can engage with both the company, Intimacy Directors and Coordinators, which is just idcprofessionals.com. You can follow my website, clairewarden.com. I don't post much on Instagram or Facebook, but I kind of do sometimes. So you might see some of that when I remember to do it. And I'm doing a bunch of work on Broadway shows and on TV and film. So you'll see some of that there as well.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much again. And thank you all so much for watching and have a lovely day.
Bye, everyone.